Okay, everybody, so welcome back to Contrarians. This is our third episode in the Worst Album Edition. Typically what we do is we champion an album that one of us feel is a band's best album that might not get the general consensus among the fans. In this case, we're actually looking at the band's worst album and agreeing to agree and going in and whether we're looking at that album's merits and then some of the things that we don't like about the album, and then at the end we give our rating, we add them together and get the average rating, and then we go from there. So why don't I hand it over to Martin, and you can talk about what we're looking at today.
Yes, hi guys. So today we are talking about Led Zeppelin, and we are talking about the Presence album. In this portion of the show, what we don't do is kind of go into our criticism of the record, but just kind of give a little bit of a background. So just quickly to, I guess to figure out how we came to Presence, it's pretty hard to criticize the first album because it's so landmark and groundbreaking, and it gets into that thing where you're kind of criticizing something because you're sick of it more than anything. So I think Led Zeppelin 1 and Led Zeppelin 2 fall into that category. I personally think Led Zeppelin 3 is my second favorite Led Zeppelin album of all time, so I could never agree to that one. Led Zeppelin 4, I think everybody basically considers it a classic. It's definitely not going to be considered the worst Led Zeppelin album. Houses of the Holy, I remember having this debate with Marco. Marco loves Houses of the Holy, and I quite like it as well. A lot of great stuff on there. Physical Graffiti is my favorite album of all time by anybody. And I'm very, very fond of In Through the Outdoor. I've grown to like it more over the years. I mean, that was one that might have been a candidate. So that just leaves Presence, and a lot of people would rank Presence pretty low on their list. And Marco and I agreed that for this episode, we will call it the worst Led Zeppelin album. Just to give a little background on Presence then. So basically they're coming off of this what I call an aircraft carrier of a record, Physical Graffiti. I think it's just the most amazing, bombastic, epic, coolest double album of all time, period. So they're coming off of that. Robert Plant has this terrible car accident on the island of Rhodes in Greece. I think it's a rented Austin Mini. His whole family, I believe Jimmy Page's daughter is with them, but he gets a really busted up foot, and Maureen, his wife, is badly injured in this thing. They were going to go on a tour, but basically they couldn't go on a tour, and they decided, well, we may as well just make a record kind of thing. So there's your first bad sign. Everybody's not in good spirits because of this whole situation. There are drug problems, exhaustion problems, but essentially what happens next is Robert and Jimmy hole up in Malibu. If you can hole up on a beachside place in Malibu, I don't know if you can do that, but essentially they are there alone, and they're kind of putting together these songs. So all of a sudden the band vibe isn't really quite there. They're kind of putting this thing together. They upstick to Musicland in Munich to record this thing. Again, spirits are not great. They're up against a deadline with the Rolling Stones, who are going in to do their Black and Blue album. Jimmy has to negotiate with them and beg with them to like give them 2 extra days to finish this thing. So they're rushed. Basically, John Paul Jones and John Bonham are coming in late to the process. They're in this place. Robert's got to sing from sitting down. He's like in a wheelchair or a chair kind of thing for his vocals. It's cold in there. It's winter. So nobody's kind of happy doing this, and they just feel rushed that they just put these songs together, and it's a really rough time. Come the mixing stage, Jimmy's in there with Keith Harwood, and they're both essentially staying up all night mixing this thing. One guy would fall asleep as the stories go. Who knows how this actually works out, but one guy would fall asleep, so it's the next guy's turn to mix. So they're all mixing, staying up 21 hours in a row working on this thing. Keith Harwood, he's got a heroin problem. I'm not sure exactly where Jimmy is in the heroin side of things at this point, but anyways, there is a lot of exhaustion. Keith Harwood would eventually die at the wheel, falling asleep at the wheel of his car during the mixing sessions or just after or something for the Rolling Stones album Love You Live, and he would be dead so a year later. But Keith Harwood is the mixer on this record. So there you go. I think I managed to get through that thing without dissing this record or making any comment. There's kind of the setup of coming together with the Presence album. So Presence comes out, I think it's 13 months after Physical Graffiti, which is, pretty fast for a Led Zeppelin situation. It's coming out in 1976, with John Bonham dying after In Through the Outdoors. So this turns out to be the second to last Led Zeppelin album. There's a live album as well, which is a terrible live album. Song remains the same. So there you have it. There's the background on Presence.
Awesome. So I guess what we're going to do now is I'm going to kind of give my pros and cons about the album, and then Martin will give his, and then we'll give a general rating and merge the two together and give our final thoughts.
That's right.
It's interesting listening to you talk about a lot of the background about this album. There is, when you say things like exhaustion, and you can kind of feel it. I mean, like, we're talking about one of the biggest bands in the world, like, 7 albums in now? Like, straight. Like, they, started in, 68, 69? They started dropping albums, and then here we are. It's like 77, and it's their 7th album, right?
Yeah,
76,
yeah.
76, yeah. That's a lot of output in a short period of time, if you think about it, Like, nowadays, bands take a few years to put out an album. So you're creatively exhausting yourself too by putting out so many albums one after another, right? One of the things I like a lot about Presence is the opening tune. Probably one of the best opening tunes for a Led Zeppelin album ever, Achilles' Last Stand. What an excellent song. And in some of my research, I've even seen some people online compare it to Stairway to Heaven, which is like the Led Zeppelin song for any casual fan. And some people even prefer Achilles' Last Stand. And I love that. That's probably my favorite song on the album is Achilles' Last Stand. And listening to it when they perform it live is amazing. And I wish I could have seen the band to see them perform that song live. I could just imagine being taken on like a journey, like a 9-minute journey during like a live set. That's one of the things I like about the album. There's a handful of things that I do not like about the album. Candy Store Rock, that's an awful tune. It sounds like a B-side to like an Elvis song. And I love Elvis, but it doesn't sound like a very good one. And like Plant, like the things about exhaustion come up a lot. I know that Plant was in that car accident before this album, and this album was kind of rushed, and he sound like his vocals on a lot of the songs sound like he's hardly there. Like he's almost like he's hardly even singing or using his vocal cords much. Hots for Nowhere. I hate that song. It sounds like a bad Peter Criss song, Like it could have been off of Peter Criss's solo album.
Love it, yeah. There's the quote of this episode right there. That was amazing.
I love Peter Criss too. Don't get me wrong. I love Elvis and Peter Criss, but it's not working for me here. Some other things I learned about the album was that, a lot of it was driven by Jimmy Page, And when you listen to the album, you almost kind of get the sense that it kind of sounds like it could have been a Page solo album that happened to be backed by Led Zeppelin. Like there's a lot less keyboards in the thing. There's a lot less. It's more kind of going back to their original sounds in some ways. And some people actually have gone back and looked at Presence and kind of applauded it for kind of sounding more like early Led Zeppelin, I guess. So it's very guitar driven. It just kind of feels like maybe some of the other band members weren't there. It almost sounds like one of those working albums. Like we got to get this album out because we made a commitment to the record label, So I got a bunch of notes here. Why don't you give your points, and then I'll come back and maybe give you some quotes from some reviews and see what you think about that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, I got a million things in my head. I did this book and I just kind of quickly read the Presence stuff in here again. I swear to God, this is my best book that I ever did. I loved doing this book. I basically had to write about every Led Zeppelin song for 400 or 500 words, just hardcore straight writing. So there's lots on Presence in this thing, but let me see if I could remember some of the salient points. So starting off with Achilles' Last Stand, I actually just did an episode of my podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, and I actually called this a contrived song. The episode was called White Album Contrivances, and I had like Aerosmith Kings and Queens in here. And I've always felt this about this song. It is my favorite song on the album. I love the song, but I do feel like it's a little bit like they're forced to try. They're just saying, let's write ourselves a heavy metal song. Let's try to do something spooky and Kashmiri and Middle Eastern-y. And they're kind of forcing themselves into this thing, and it's really long, and I find it a little bit repetitive. There are some amazing parts on it. I agree with what you say, Marco. I mean, it's a really interesting thing. First of all, there's no keyboards on this album, and there's one acoustic guitar rhythm track massaged into Candy Store Rock. So essentially, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a really cool thing you said about this feeling like it's a Jimmy Page solo album. It is all about guitars first kind of thing. Of course, bass and drums as well. But I always bristle when people call this the most hard rocking Led Zeppelin album or a hard rock album, because it has hard rock arrangements, but it really isn't written particularly hard rock. That's the thing. So it's arranged simple and rudimentary, and it is one of their quickest made albums, probably the quickest. I don't know, maybe not, maybe the first one. But it does just have this almost laziness to the arrangements. You don't have the magic pixie dust of John Paul Jones on here. Having said that, John Bonham, I mean, there's a lot of really cool rhythms throughout this record, which is kind of cool. So, okay, For Your Life, I kind of like For Your Life. It's a pretty cool song. This one is about, Robert's talking about, he's very jaded lyrically on this. It's about cocaine and groupies, and apparently it was a message to the band a little bit that everybody should start taking care of themselves a little more. Royal Orleans is a song that's kind of like a funky, the crunge going on to Aerosmith Last Child sort of song. It's a little bit, it's a story of like being in New Orleans and in a hotel room, and maybe you went there with a transvestite, but you thought it was a girl and all this. So there's this proper name in the song called John Cameron, but people are talking, oh, is it about John Paul Jones? Is it about Richard Cole? So the story is very befuddled, just like a late night New Orleans drinking session supposed to be, I suppose. But yeah, it's this kind of funky song. So they're getting into this casual mode with For Your Life and Royal Orleans. Nobody's Fault But Mine, I really like a lot. So only Nobody's Fault But Mine and Achilles' Last Stand ever got played live off of this album, which is pretty interesting. That tells you what they kind of thought of it. And this is one of these that's a little bit derived from an old blues classic, that problem Jimmy found himself in, periodically throughout the catalog. But it's a cool, heavy song. I quite like it. Again, Marco, great point you made about the vocals on this record. Robert does sound like he doesn't have that charismatic high shriek anywhere. He sounds like a heavy smoker or something, or he sounds fatigued. And Jimmy's guitar, I mean, Jimmy is now moving into this zone where he's got this, how do I usually call it? Smoked, choked, hurly-burly sort of sound that you get on this, you get on In Through the Outdoor, you get on Outrider, you get on the 2 Firm albums. So he's finding a style that he didn't have previously. And I think it starts with this record, and it's a very interesting style. But yeah, it's probably the time. This is probably the time where you actually get a unique Jimmy Page style coming up, which is kind of cool. Candy Store Rock. So this is the tribute to rock and roll. It's a rockabilly kind of song. Robert Plant's doing an Elvis Presley impression on it. Again, this is actually, it's actually a pretty interesting song, and there's some really, really cool John Bonham, mathematical rhythms on it. But then I think the album kind of really does, like, they just check out. I think Hot's On For Nowhere, I just don't like. I just find it just way too casual. And T for One is like a 9-minute blues. They were apparently trying to, recapture the magic of Since I've Been Loving You on it. Very mournful lyric about being alone. Robert being, he's away from the family. He's injured. There was some talk along the way, is Robert ever going to walk again, because he really smashed up his foot. There's Robert lamenting being a tax exile. I mean, his convalescence from this. First he was in Greece, his convalescence was in Jersey, They're writing in Malibu. They're recording in Germany. So they're just globe-trotting all over. And everybody's just tired, right? Tired, but they're turning in this really sort of, inflammatory, fast, semi-heavy, pretty rock and rolling album. But again, I think across a lot of these songs, people will say, it's almost like because of the strength and the creative daring of the rest of the Led Zeppelin catalog, or the groundbreaking nature in the early days, that Presence kind of just loses by default. It's not an album I really hate. It's not a disaster. They only have the 8 records, right? Plus Coda. But I think it almost just kind of falls down by default. It's just like after you start praising every other record, what record is left, and maybe it's Presence. So there you go. I think I crammed in most of the points I had in my Zeppelin book, all the albums, all the songs, or most of them. But yeah, it's definitely there you go. I mean, there's my view on it. I don't know if I'm supposed to say my grade yet at this point or whatever, but I will agree with you that it is probably the worst Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah, a couple of things that you reminded me of, just bringing up some of the track listing, like you talk about Candy Store Rock being kind of like a callback to like old rock and roll, but the problem is it's like those old rock and roll songs are like 2 minutes long. Candy Store Rock is over 4 minutes, and it kind of sounds like it should have been 2 minutes, Yeah. Royal Orleans, I'm glad you brought that one up because I had a point about that. That one sounds like a Led Zeppelin song. Like it sounds like if you played Royal Orleans for somebody who's not familiar with a lot of Zeppelin songs, they go, "Oh, I know that song. Is it Ozone Baby or is it that?" Like it almost doesn't even have its own fingerprint. It just kind of sounds like a Led Zeppelin song that doesn't have its own soul, What was it, T for One? That kind of sounds like a mimic of what should and should never be, or what's that song called?
Right. Yeah. Whatever. Yeah, I'm not sure, but they do reference 927. Wow, it's long, eh?
Yeah. There's a couple of long songs on the album. Achilles' Last Stand is about 9 minutes too, right?
Yeah. 10. What do we got here? 10:26 on the back of the CD. Yeah.
And they did a similar thing with In Through the Outdoor. They had a couple of long songs on that one as well.
Yeah. I want to mention T for One. My favorite part is really that really weird, moody intro thing before it falls into the blues. I mean, collapses into the blues in a pile on a couch almost. I mean, it's literally like Led Zeppelin check out, right? In a way at the end of this record. But the beginning is this weird sort of odd, shambling riff that's kind of spooky and kind of cool. I really like that intro to that song.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go through a couple of points and then we'll give our ratings. So Jimmy Page said it's not an easy album for a lot of people to access. It's not an easy album for a lot of people to listen to. Here's some quotes from some reviews. Led Zeppelin at their most blunted. One of Zeppelin's worst albums. Sounds as rushed as it was. If you just do a Google search of ranked Led Zeppelin albums, it's typically at the bottom. Ultimate Classic Rock, Rolling Stone Readers poll. It's typically in the bottom couple of albums. It kind of sticks right around that 7 or 8 mark, Some of these polls also include Coda and some other albums, like Song Remains the Same. Interesting. I want to get your take on this. Esquire ranked Presence second last and said it was their worst selling album and dies after Achilles' Last Stand, as if they put their energy into the 10-minute opener and had nothing left.
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty harsh. Yeah. I mean, it's true. I think everybody does say Achilles' Last Stand is the best song in the album, and so do I. Even though I spent a whole episode of History in 5 Songs, criticizing it, but yeah, it is the best song on it. A point you brought up. So yeah, it went triple platinum in the States, which is fantastic, but it is actually the worst selling Led Zeppelin album.
And who would kill for a triple platinum album too, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But this is the one I wanted to get your take on. So Ultimate Classic Rock actually placed Presence above Physical Graffiti and said Physical was a throwaway bloated double album engulfed with debris. And I know that you typically point to that album as one of the greatest albums ever made. So I'd like to get your opinion on somebody putting, Physical Graffiti so low and even putting it below Presence.
Yeah, I mean, most people love Physical Graffiti. They will rate that the high. I mean, I can't think of anybody who doesn't rate it the highest, but Led Zeppelin 4
Ultimate Classic Rock doesn't.
Yeah. But, it's always easy to call a double album bloated. I mean, most of them aren't, or a lot of them aren't. Put it that way. Clash Sandinista as a triple is bloated. London Calling is not bloated, but. No, I don't think it's bloated at all. I mean, that album, start to finish, there's so much cool variety on it. And even though there are a lot of songs that were recorded across many sessions and written across many sessions, I think, I can't remember the number, but when I was reading through my own book on it, it's 8 or 10 or something songs that are completely brand new on it as well. The thing about that is I never for once growing up listening to that for decades thought, I thought the production, they basically made everything sound like one album. Nothing on there sounds older or newer than whatever. So it doesn't sound even odds and sods to me. It sounds like one session. So kudos to the people putting it together. I believe Ron Nevison was on mixing on that with Jimmy, who Jimmy's always the producer. But no, I think all the heavy stuff is more inspired by Achilles' Last Stand. I think all the bluesy or experimental stuff is better than anything on Presence that's experimental that way. And obviously it's got Cashmere and the Rover, Custard Pie, Sick Again, Wanton Song, Night Flight. I mean, it just goes on and on. Trampled Underfoot, 10 years after, 10 years gone. It's the song Houses of the Holy, which is, the title track, amusingly of the previous album, but it's not on the previous album. Great hooky melodic song. So yeah, I just think everything on that record is incredible, and there's just not a lot on Presence that is incredible. I mean, it is punchy and heavy, and it's kind of like what the fans might have asked for. It's one of those kinds of records, right? It's like if you ask the fans, what do you want to hear? Oh, rock out for us. Just whip something together, rocking out. You might kind of get this, but again, like I say, I don't think it's written particularly heavy metal or hard rock other than Achilles' Last Stand and maybe Nobody's Fault But Mine. It just feels like it's lazily arranged, that everybody just plugs in and does these songs, even though some of these songs could have used, like I say, some of that John Paul Jones pixie dust.
Yeah, and the other thing about Presence too is that, like, for somebody who's not a huge hardcore Zeppelin fan, you're not going to find a lot of hidden gems on Presence. Like, probably the best song is the most well-known song off the album that you said was one of the only songs they played live, right? Like, even with In Through the Outdoor, like Carousel Ombra, that song, that's kind of a weird gem. The keys are kind of addicting, and the way Plant sings it is kind of addicting. Like, you might pick up an album like In Through the Outdoor and find like this kind of hidden gem that you didn't really know of as a Zeppelin fan or a general Zeppelin fan, right? Well, with Presence, you're probably not going to find that hidden gem that, like, you need to pick up Presence just for that song, because you'll get Achilles' Last Stand and Nobody's Fault But Mine on a bunch of other compilation albums or live albums or whatever. You can kind of skip Presence and not really miss much.
Yeah. Well, 7 songs, right? So 7 songs, and as you mentioned, very good point. I mean, you look at these 7 songs, and I would say 5 or 6 of them could have shaved a minute and a half off of each of them, and you could have had another couple of songs. That would have been kind of cool.
Yeah, a minute and a half or 4 in some songs cases, right? So why don't we go give our ratings? I'll go first, and then I'll let you rate it.
All right.
So when we're talking about like the worst album, we're not technically talking about an album that's bad. I don't think that Presence is a bad album. And for me, it's kind of like, if I'm rating it out of 10, I'm going to compare it to at least the other Led Zeppelin albums. So if you're going to say something like Led Zeppelin 2 or Led Zeppelin 4 is like an 8 or 9 out of 10, then like I'd have to say Presence is maybe like a 5 or a 5.5 or 6 even. I'll say 5.5. It's not a bad album, but you stack it up next to these giants and it kind of looks a little short. So I'm going to give it like an average 5, but I don't think it's a bad album. And I do enjoy Presence. There's things I do like about Presence. So I'm going to go with a solid 5.5 out of 10.
Okay.
I'd like to get your rating.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with a 6 out of 10. I was leaning to a 7, but no, that's way too gratuitous, and your argument just now dragged my grade down by a point, definitely. And I do feel a little bit of an anger. I mean, I love Led Zeppelin, but let's face it, a lot of what they did is overrated. And when I say overrated, I really carefully want to use the definition of overrated in terms of Led Zeppelin is highly, 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 highly rated all the time, and Presence is pretty highly rated. But when you're super, super highly rated, it's easy to be overrated. So I think a lot of Led Zeppelin along the way, I think of the productions are kind of overrated. I mean, Led Zeppelin has a lot of mid-rangey, distorted sounds. They aren't great on treble and they aren't great on bass really across the catalog, but it's a very interesting production sound. And even this record has a very, right in the core of what Jimmy kind of is going for as a visionary when it comes to production. He loves this dry middle sort of sound, and this is on purpose, right? What he's doing here. So they mean to do this, but yeah. So I also get that anger feeling that makes me want to bring it down to a 5, just to punish, and just to send the message that Led Zeppelin is a little bit overrated in the world because they are so godly rated, right? But no, I'll go with a 6. Yeah, and I just want to make another point. I mean, when Led Zeppelin is making Presence, Aerosmith is making Rocks, and Rocks craps all over Presence from a height of several miles, basically. I mean, there's just no comparison anymore. Led Zeppelin's mantle has been taken over by Aerosmith. I mean, you just compare the two 1976 records, and they are just in completely different leagues. So that's another one of them anger things that I want to say, look, there are things happening better than Led Zeppelin in the world right now. But yeah, so there you go. I'll go with a 6.
Awesome. So I was already kind of leaning towards 6, so let's just say average 6 score from the Contrarians.
No, let's go 5.75. Let's do the math.
Okay, yeah. 5.75. Is there any last things that you want to bring up?
No, I think I've just rambled on, to quote Led Zeppelin, a little bit much.
Okay, one post point I want to bring up is, when a band reissues an album, they remaster it, they add bonus tracks, and they re-release it, like they did with Presence in 2015. Does that kind of sway or change your opinion on an album? When you go back and you're able to hear a remastered version, there's some new tracks in there. Do you kind of have a different feeling walking away from that?
Not really. And the Led Zeppelin reissues were really, they just don't have much in the vaults. And across all these reissues, there really wasn't much added to the vaults. I mean, I do like when a record gets an improved sound, but to me, that's kind of cheating a little bit. The original is what God intended, right? Jimmy Page in this case being God. So no, I don't think so. I think we got to look at. Yeah, actually, let me mention one more thing about Presence, because we didn't talk about it at all. I love this album cover concept with the object, right? The little black thing in there. And I interviewed Aubrey Powell, and we talked all about this, and he gave me the fascinating story about it. It's a little bit about the presence that Led Zeppelin has as a band, but it's also a really cool story he told me about this is that, the reason it looks the way it does on here is it's meant to be the opposite of a presence, and it's an absence. It's literally a black hole. You can't see the definition of the object like you can in the promo objects that literally got made and sent out to people, this not so great little promo item that sells for a lot of money now. So when you make an actual object, it's got to have that. But it's literally like a black hole that gets sucked into here. And he had a cool story about, they went to Japan and they had some kind of display that they had at some sort of convention or whatever. And they made this optical illusion version of the object, which was a whole thing, and people would reach out to it, and you'd actually go into a black hole, and people would be really surprised. So it's kind of a cutout thing that, that gave the message of the object. But what a cool thing, right? And all this, the inside pictures were meant to be like an old National Geographic, and this object gets put in there. I think it's just one of the most fantastic, coolest things Hypnosis ever did.
Very cool. Thank you for pointing that out. And I guess we'll kind of wrap it up. This time we agree to agree. I want to give a shout out to all of our followers, subscribers, and fans. I think 2 weeks ago we hit 10,000 lifetime views, and now we're already like almost 12,000. We have over 300 subscribers now. We're almost at 350. So things have been picking up a lot, and I just want to thank everybody for liking, subscribing, commenting, anybody that joined in the conversations, who either agreed with us or disagreed with us, but you told us why, and we listened, and we appreciate everybody who watches our videos, and this is really cool, and you're allowing us to do what we love to do, which is talk about music. So I just want to thank all of our viewers, and we hit some milestones, and hopefully we'll hit a few more. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Very cool.
All right, take care.